My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, now leading the charge for New World Trade Center investigation, along with his wife Gail at richardgage911.org. Richard Gage, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jerm. Great to be here with you.
What is this Bay Area thing? Why do Americans say that? Is it the area that's around a bay? We don't talk like that here, so I don't know what it means.
Well, there's this huge bay. San Francisco's only a small part of it. It includes dozens of cities, pretty large cities like Oakland, it's Berkeley, etc. So it's a huge metropolitan area.
So when you say Bay Area, is that like more specific?
It's less specific than San Francisco, where I'm not from, thankfully, right. And more inclusive of a metropolitan area that's larger than the Los Angeles metropolitan area.
I apologize for my lack of American knowledge, but I learn something every day. By the way, let me turn it around. Have you been to my side of the pond?
I've never been to Africa, if that's what you mean. I've certainly been to...
You need to change that.
Yeah, well, I hear all kinds of things about South Africa that concern me. Farmers being murdered,
etc. A lot of it is nonsense. A lot
really?
of it is just propaganda. Oh. Look, it's not, you know, this isn't the world's safest country, but it's not a war zone.
Okay, then. Maybe I'll come.
Why are you a former CEO of Architects and Engineers?
Well, 20 years ago, I started the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, with 14 of them signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. And we've grown that to 3,600 architects and engineers. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we had differences of opinion. I wanted to branch off and talk about COVID and the parallels between 9/11 and COVID. Well, you know, these 3,600 architects and engineers did sign a petition not for COVID investigation, but for 9/11. And so this was a discussion, you know, do we branch out or do we not? And I wanted to, and they didn't. So I went off on my own, started richardgage911.org, and we've, along with my wife, Gail, we have been at it ever since, and doing 85 podcasts, more than a dozen speaking engagements, and 1,000 radio interviews altogether now.
When you say a new World Trade Center investigation, what do you mean?
Well, the 9/11 Commission didn't even mention the third worst structural failure in modern history that happened on 9/11, 47-story Building 7, which we're going to talk about, and I'll show you. It came down rapidly, symmetrically, after witnesses heard explosions into its own footprint. And that's a significant event because no plane hit that building, right? This investigation has to include Building 7, and the Twin Towers, a very explosive destruction as well.
But here's the thing that blows my mind. If I talk to just about anybody about 9/11, we'll talk about the towers and the Pentagon. Nobody knows about Building 7.
Yeah, most architects and engineers don't even know. It's been hidden from us. The board of directors of the American Institute of Architects, 90,000 members, of which I'm one, they didn't even issue one bulletin on this major catastrophe. Again, no plane hit the building. So why did it go down? Well, NIST came along, as you'll see, and blamed fires.
Has that ever happened anywhere else?
I got to show you the evidence. No, it's never. Fires have never brought down a steel frame fire-protected building in history ever. The Securities and Exchange Commission lost thousands of files related to hundreds of cases that they were actively pursuing against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom. These are major destruction of evidence. It takes courage to look at this information, and it took me a lot of courage. It just turned my world upside down when I found out about the explosive destruction of these buildings. I mean, the whole world has been scammed, right? It just has to be false. I have to prove it wrong, and I tried, and I couldn't. David Ray Griffin was giving a presentation the next day after I heard him on the radio on KPFA's Guns and Butter program, and boy, I went, and man, I'm going, this is either the biggest scam in history, or this. I mean 9/11, or this gentleman's lying. And it turns out everything that I found out was true. In fact, he told me about Building 7, which most people don't even know anything about. Again, not hit by a plane. Football field in length away from the North Tower. It suffered some damage during the collapse of the North Tower, but this damage, according to NIST, was not a significant factor in the building's collapse. Well, let's look at that collapse. Here's Building 7 at 5:20 in the afternoon. The east penthouse comes down first in an isolated event. 6 seconds later, the entire building does this. Straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint. After witnesses heard explosions, again, what was the official narrative, Jerm? It was this.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
I suppose we should look at those fires. These are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the building. They are few, they are relatively small, and they are scattered throughout the building. And NIST claims that these fires brought the building down. We're going to look at that in some detail, but these fires were out over an hour before this building comes down on the floor of the initiation of collapse, which NIST relies on those fires burning. In fact, they show those fires burning well after 4 p.m. in their simulation. So their simulation of the fires in their computer model shows them burning very hot along this whole edge, and yet the photographs show that they've burned out. And their initiation of collapse theory requires the fires to be burning at the time of the collapse, which is an hour and 20 minutes later. And they... because it's an initiation of, it's the thermal expansion of long span beams in this area. These long span beams here, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column 79. They have this whole elaborate theory, none of which can be true. In fact, fires have never brought down a steel frame fire-protected structure, as I mentioned, ever. Not
those look worse. Those look way worse.
These are much larger, hotter, and longer-lasting fires, especially in these buildings. You recognize one of these, at least in Grenfell. I keep thinking of by your accent that you're in England. You're not in England.
No, I'm not in the UK.
But you have high-rise buildings in South Africa.
Yes,
and I don't know if they've done this, but if they did, they wouldn't fall. None of these buildings have fallen.
No. Just quickly, Richard, before you go on, if you don't mind me interjecting from time to time.
Not at all.
Just as a matter of curiosity, can you remember what you were doing on this day?
On 9/11, I was getting ready for my... for going to work with my wife at the time. We were looking at the TV and going, whoa, that building, that second building was hit by a plane. That is clearly not an accident, right? So at that point, I realized we're under attack. Then I saw the towers come down, not Building 7. They didn't show that. But the towers, they did show quite a number of times. And boy, it didn't look like a collapse to me, but it took me 5 years to realize that something was fishy. Only when I heard David Ray Griffin, who's now written 14 books on the subject of 9/11, did I start to rethink 9/11. And you
Yeah,
can
it took
see
me
why. Longer than that, yeah. Most people, and then when you see it, of course, you can't unsee it like this. Here's Building 7 on the right, a series of known controlled demolitions on the left. Is there any similarity?
They look
Is there
identical.
enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since fire.
They all go, they all drop into their own footprint.
Yep, and they're all dropping at a certain speed, and that speed actually does vary a little bit. But we're going to look at the typical features of controlled demolition and compare those features to Building 7 and see if it has any of those features. Let's begin with a sudden onset of destruction. The first feature of controlled demolition. Is there that? Let's listen to Dan Rather.
Here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Those are pretty important words. He's never repeated them on mainstream television ever. In fact, with the exception of 2 times, Jerm, we've never seen this building collapse on TV. It should have been the most studied structural failure ever by engineers and architects, and it's not. They just have swept it under the rug. So let's see if feature number 2 is apparent. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? As we look from West Street, we can see, oh yeah, that's pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do you do that, Jerm? You got to remove all the core columns at once, within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. Any deviation from that pattern, and you have a real problem. Can these fires create that level of precision? Obviously not, right? Here's what happens. Go ahead. Look at this. This is you get charges that don't go off. You get really strange things in controlled demolitions if it's not exactly perfect like that.
Now, I was going to ask you, so you're an architect, so you understand how a structure like this needs to be built and broken apart in order for it to fall like that.
Yeah, you have to take out all the core columns and then followed about a second later, all the perimeter columns at once.
So it has to be
repeat that
precision.
on every floor. Oh yeah, every floor, synchronistically timed. All the way down up the building. Typically, they start low in the building, and which allows gravity to do that work. Fires, especially these fires, are not going to accomplish that.
But no, I mean, so some people argue that fires can do that. They can weaken the beams.
Well, these fires can weaken beams, but look at the asymmetry. If those fires did weaken the beams and they were burned out over an hour before this building collapsed, so they couldn't have expanded those beams, pushing that girder off of its seat. But if it did, don't you think the building would fall over to the left, the northeast corner? No, you've damaged a building in the northeast corner, and yes, it would fall over to that corner. But no, it falls straight down, as you saw. The official narrative says these beams were expanded, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column 79, causing this floor 13 to fall on 12, 12 on 11, 11 on 10, and so on for 9 floors. And then this instability travels laterally across this football field's length building, and somehow in just 6 seconds, and the whole thing falls down. No, if a building is damaged on one side, you'd expect it to fall to that side. If you get kicked in the knee, you fall over to that side. You don't fall to the other side. So, and you're not going to fall. If you do fall, the other steel members in the structure are going to slow down that fall. But this building fell at free fall. This is documented by physicists. Free falls as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky, gaining velocity every second, in fact. That's the definition of free fall, no resistance. This building had like 40,000 tons of structural steel supporting it. Where did all that steel go so that this building could fall at free fall? As acknowledged, finally, by NIST after denying it for 6 years. They acknowledged, okay, yeah, you're right. This building did come down at free fall. Well, what happened to all the columns that were supporting the building? That means not one of these 80 columns gave any resistance to this building's collapse. Did these fires take all of those columns out? No, we don't think so. So we look at the next feature, the total dismemberment of the structural steel frame. Yeah, it falls like a house of cards. The exterior walls on top of the interior walls, every column from every beam almost separated from each other, so that a 47-story moment-resisting welded steel frame building came down and compressed to 4 to 6 stories tall. Fascinating. How does that happen? By fire. In a building that is a natural collapse, like these buildings, due to earthquakes, the building falls over. The columns and beams are not severed one from another. The building is recognizable as a building as opposed to a house of cards. So could these fires do the damage that was done? We don't think so. So what could is the question, Jerm. Maybe explosions could. Well, explosions leave signs, right? NIST says there's no witnesses of explosions. Well, what about this one?
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that. And
the building followed after that, after a sound of a clap of thunder, after a shockwave ripping through the building. How about Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, who was on hand to see this destruction?
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Okay, and what did Bill Rosati see?
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
Big flash. How about first responder Captain Richard Patterson from the FDNY, Fire Department of New York?
1-7 let go as well, and was a series of concussive explosions.
Okay, and first responder Patrick Dillon.
I remember feeling that like it was like freight trains underneath the earth, shaking the earth, even shaking me. That's when we all saw Building 7 crumple in the middle, like way up at the top. It buckled and then dropped.
And the Deputy Director of New York's Emergency Management Office, Richard Rotans.
Then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building
creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft and it was down the hall.
An elevator car blown out of its shaft that was down the hall? How did an elevator car get 40 feet down the hall from its hoistway, leaving a huge hole in the hoistway? That's pretty extraordinary. This is not due to damage, which NIST says was done in the southwest corner of this building by when the North Tower went down. Which, by the way, that damage, if that was the cause of this building's collapse, which NIST says it was not, it would have fallen to the southwest corner, to the lower left in this case. So it doesn't do that either. So we know we have massive explosions, witnessed also by Barry Jennings and Michael Hess, who had been called to a meeting that morning, and they were late. And the building had been evacuated, but this is their experience trying to get into the building after the planes had hit the towers, but well before the towers came down nearby. This is their experience.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs? Bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 nearby in the vicinity of Building 7?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
NIST says there's no witnesses of explosions, and yet we just heard more than half a dozen. So why are they lying about explosions relative to Building 7? There are a dozen other witnesses of explosions in our longer presentations. But somebody brought a laptop to this expert in controlled demolition and showed him the Building 7 because he didn't know about it well after 9/11. And Danny Jowenko is the top European controlled demolition expert.
Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten, zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Team of experts. Well, he's not alone in that assessment. 3 dozen structural engineers are among the 3,600 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation, like Kamal Obaid, who says a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Well, this caught the attention of Professor Leroy Hulsey from the University of Alaska, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, who proceeded to do a 4-year study of this building, concluding through several competing software programs to confirm each other results, which they did, that if the building was damaged in the northeast corner, it would have tipped to the northeast corner. Okay, they confirmed that. But what did they have to do to get it to fall like the video? They had to take all the core columns out within a fraction of a second of each other. Followed on the left is their computer model, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. That's how it looks like the video in the center. Whereas the computer model on the right was produced by NIST, which doesn't even match the collapse very well at all, with the exception of the penthouse. You have 400 structural steel connections failing every second on the left side of their computer model, but it actually stops. They don't even after 4 years of trying to get this computer model back engineered to mimic the behavior of the video, they can't do that. It begins to tip over. And so they stop it 2 seconds into the global collapse. So they failed utterly to prove their case. In fact, it disproves their case. What was the conclusions of the University of Alaska? Fire didn't cause the collapse of this building. Temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and the girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST. So that has gone everywhere, including to every member of Congress in the United States. So what could have brought this building down? What kind of explosives are there? Well, we have a clue. We can look at the evidence of extreme heat provided by who? FEMA. In this case, in their Building Performance Assessment Team report, came out in May of 2002, a metallurgical examination of the steel, that few pieces that they managed to save, they find never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like you see here. Fire doesn't do this to steel. Fire's 3,000 degrees, it takes 3,000 degrees to melt steel. The fires are typically less than a quarter of those temperatures. So what's melting this steel? And the Twin Towers as well. This piece is from World Trade Center Building 7. This piece from the Twin Towers. Thinned to razor sharpness. The web centerpiece of the I-beam is thinned from 5/8 inches to razor sharpness. What do they document? Rapid oxidation, sulfidation. Fire doesn't do that. Liquid iron, that's melted iron. That's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about half that Celsius. So sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. That's as far as this investigation went. What are they talking about? The New York Times calls this the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation. But it's omitted in the NIST report. They completely omit it when they take over the investigation 2 years later. They throw this part out. But the fire protection engineer Jonathan Barnett of the FEMA team says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. He's not talking about fire here. He's talking about something else because it takes 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about 2,000 Celsius, to evaporate steel. Well, we can tell the temperature of molten steel or iron pouring out of the crab claw excavator here. We can tell it because it's color. That's the physics of molten materials. We're talking 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit here, twice as hot as office fires get typically, maybe 3 times and even 4 times most office fires. This is about 1371 Celsius. Well, this is a problem. The hottest office fires, in the most conservative, mathematically based experimental worst case data, 1,830 degrees is what they used just to be safe, very conservative. 1,830. But we're talking temperatures exceeding twice this, as you'll see. So can jet fuel do that? No, jet fuel burns at about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, according to this petroleum engineer, in open air. Jet fuel only burns this hot. What burns hotter? Maybe thermite does, Jerm. Let's find out what is thermite,
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Maybe we're getting somewhere here, because if thermite were used, it would explain the extreme temperatures, 4,000 and 5,000 degrees, that fire can't and jet fuel can't explain. It would explain the presence of sulfur, which is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. Would also explain the presence of other ignited incendiary evidence that was found by the U.S. Geological Survey in their 2005 particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust. What did they find? Billions of previously molten iron microspheres. Iron. We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. Where's this iron coming from? Iron, molten iron, is the byproduct of thermite. How does it get spherical? Well, when you spray aerosolized liquids form themselves into spheres, even aerosolized molten iron liquids, by the pressure of explosions. That's just what the physics of it is. That's what raindrops are. They're spherical. Well, there's so many of these that the EPA even used them as a signature component of the World Trade Center dust. In other words, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all these previously molten iron microspheres, which they don't even know and didn't bother to speculate where they might come from. But they're found in all the dust samples, up to 6% of these dust samples. Some of them contain previously molten iron microspheres. We're talking about 4 tons of this material extrapolating. So RJ Lee Group independently finds and documents them. They say, in fact, they're formed during the event, not before, by the iron workers welding the building together. The towers, not afterward by the workers cutting the building apart, but during the event itself. Well, how are they formed? We could do an experiment. The experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's light some thermite, see what happens. It looks like thousands of sparks. But they cool and they fall into the pan as previously molten iron microspheres. That's all evidence of ignited thermite. Is there any evidence of unignited thermite found in the World Trade Center dust? Seems so. We have Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones leading a team of 8 international scientists, and they study this dust chemically. He's a nuclear engineer, nanotechnical professor. They team up and they find all of these red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. They're curious because they thought they were paint, but they don't act like paint. The largest is about 1/16 of an inch. They're very small chips, but they're attracted to a magnet. So they have a high iron content. And they get real interesting because they want to rule out paint. So they examine the red layer and they rule out paint. Very high aluminum peaks. They have iron and silica and manganese, which is not used in paint. And which is the signature of thermite. What's that doing in all the paint? Well, they zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find these nanoparticles inside these little red-gray chips of iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets at the nanoscale, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. So they find this is super thermite. They do research. They say, well, what is this stuff? Well, it's explosive composites based on thermite reactions. The fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed at the nanometer size scale. This is developed by Lawrence Livermore Lab before 9/11/2001. When you get these particles so small at the nanoscale, the magic of it is that the surface volume increases exponentially, and when it's intimately mixed, you have instant chemical reaction. You've engineered an incendiary, which works by means of heat, to become more explosive. In fact, at about 430 degrees Celsius, they ignite. Interestingly, and that's exactly in this published data by Lawrence Livermore Lab, that's what you find. What they found, the international scientists studying the World Trade Center dust found that all of their samples did the same thing. They ignite at that temperature, about 850 Fahrenheit. That is not paint. Paint doesn't have these exotic properties. They've ruled out paint. That's not a question among scientists who've looked at this data and responded to it. And then what happens, though, when they ignite? What do they produce? Previously molten iron microspheres. Well, they produce molten iron microspheres, which cool. And very interesting, with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in all the World Trade Center dust samples by the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee. So we know exactly where those molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips. As if we didn't know, they're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. This is very sophisticated technology, not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories.
Wait, Richard. Are you telling me that a gray bearded Muslim man in a cave in the Middle East with a Nokia 3310 couldn't have pulled this off?
Not likely. Very unlikely. This stuff is highly controlled. They don't hand it to every Muslim terrorist who comes along. Well, maybe they did. It's possible that, but if you look at the security in the World Trade Center in Building 7, it's three of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon. Unlikely to be penetrated by outside terror. But the study is peer-reviewed in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. In 2009, they've concluded that the red layer is active, unreacted thermitic material, incorporating nanotechnology. It's highly energetic or pyrotechnic explosive material, or explosive. This crosses the boundary of incendiaries versus explosives. So we know that it was used to bring down the towers. There may have been other devices, other methodologies. This we know, though, and along with high energy explosives due to the behavior of the Twin Towers, which we're going to look at in a second. But with regard to Building 7, we have all the key characteristic and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition. This is direct evidence of destruction with incendiaries in the case of Building 7, and not characteristic of destruction by fire. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony that we've looked, some of which we've looked at, this is proof beyond a doubt of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced 3,000 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation, many of which appear in our ongoing film series 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, which I would like to show you the trailer of. Here goes.
No matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury.
This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down, were basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations not only for our filings with the grand jury, also as presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jury during each episode.
And yes, we're encouraging everybody to look at this film series. We produced 5 episodes so far. The 6th one's coming out in a couple of weeks. And you can see them at 911c2c.org. Letter C, number 2, letter C.org. And encourage everybody to take part in this series because it's co-produced by you, our viewers. We can't do it alone. We need your help. $500 donation will get you into the credits as an executive producer. And so we encourage you to donate at any level. And because you got to ask yourself a question, right, Jerm? We're talking about clear evidence of Building 7. Well, then, if that's true, and that was a controlled demolition, which involves a deep conspiracy all by itself, shouldn't we at least look at the evidence in the Twin Towers to see if there's destruction by explosives there as well? Well, we can, in 2 seconds, figure that out pretty clearly. We have upward, outward, arching streamers in this destruction of each of these towers, the north and the south, simultaneously shown here for clarity and comparison. We have 4 and 8-ton structural steel sections ejected laterally at over 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, landing up to 600 feet in every direction, trailed by what? Thick, white smoke clouds. Why are thick, white smoke clouds trailing these structural steel sections? They're not flammable. Structural steel is not flammable in office fire or jet fuel conditions. What are these thick, white smoke clouds? Well, we burn some thermite and we can see thick, white smoke clouds of what? Aluminum oxide ash, the other byproduct of thermite, in addition to the molten iron. So we'll look at those in some detail as we compare the features of the destruction of the Twin Towers to controlled demolition, which we'll start with. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Looking at the North Tower, it's at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. It's a sudden onset. There's no slowing down of this when it meets the cold, hard steel below. Same with the South Tower. It's at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform, almost free fall, downward motion. You'd expect the steel below to slow it down. We'll look at that. But the official narrative tells us that the upper part destroyed the lower part and then destroyed itself magically. Well, this violates Newton's third law. This was given to us by Zdeněk Bazan of Northwestern University in Chicago in his extremely complex piece of mathematical wizardry, which became the key theoretical basis for NIST's column failure theory of the Twin Towers. And this paper was submitted just 2 days after 9/11. The rest of us are freaked out. Who's doing this to us? When's the next attack coming? But not this gentleman, structural engineer, mathematical genius. He is in his den providing the key theoretical basis for NIST. And sure enough, it gets published and it's full of problems. Like, for instance, the violation of Newton's third law of motion. There's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Take a Mack truck, a lorry, and run it into a Volkswagen. Who wins, right? The lorry. Doesn't matter if we drop the Volkswagen on it. No. The lightest part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the cold steel that gets heavier and heavier. It's a virtual pyramid. Take a look at the lightest columns are at the top. Then they get heavier and heavier as they assume more loads from gravity and from wind, and they get heavier and heavier. These core columns are 52 inches by 22 inches at the bottom, almost solid steel. Well, let's look and see what's happening to the upper part. Is it crushing the lower part? Well, let's make it easier. Take a look at the lower red line at the point of plane impacts. Is that block driving the rest of the building down, or is it telescoping in on itself, destroying itself? And what's destroying it? We'll come to that. But if it were driving the rest of the building down to the ground, we would see it. But none of the photos, none of the videos show such an upper block destroying the lower block. It's been destroyed, as you saw, in the first 3 seconds. After that, it's in pieces. If it were there, it would have, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Richard, this video clip here breaks my brain. There, look at that steel beam. It looks like it's vanishing.
Well, what's happening is you can see, this steel column, this set of steel columns from the inner core of the World Trade Center would have been crushed by that upper block. So what this video proves is that an upper block did not destroy the rest of the structure. And now, 6 seconds, 12 seconds later, what we see is not it vanishing, but descending frame by frame. You can see the top of this steel column descending through the smoke that it has been, that's emanating off of it due to these explosives. You can see the top of it. It's going down. It's not vanishing. And that's smoke. That's not dust. Some of the proponents of the directed energy weapons theory who say this turning to steel, the steel's turning to dust.
That's kind of what I'm alluding to, because I've had a couple of those discussions before. By the way, just quickly, just if you don't mind, what is your view on that?
Well, if there's no steel dust found by any of the numerous agencies studying the dust, none of them find steel dust in the dust. They find previously molten iron microspheres. They find red-gray chips of nanothermite. They don't find any steel dust. So if 90,000 tons of structural steel in each tower was turned to dust, I think you'd see some of that dust in the dust. But you don't. And so, no, the proponents of that theory deny the evidence that we're showing you, evidence of explosive destruction. I mean, just take a look at it on the left versus a volcanic eruption on the right. Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects. That's not part of the directed energy weapons theory.
Yeah, but the thing here, Richard, sorry for jumping in, is that if you look at buildings that have fallen in the past, this was obviously very, very aggressive. I mean, look at that. I mean, just look what that looks like. Yeah. I mean, I've never seen a building look like that when it collapses.
No, This is very unique. The Twin Towers are a very explosive event with thermite, the producing the aluminum oxide ash trailing the 4 and 8 ton structural steel sections. So yes, it looks more like a volcanic eruption. And that's why high energy explosives, incendiaries, that's what we're talking about here. It's not a crush down, crush up theory. Because of that central piece, we have proven that theory to be a lie. The upper part didn't destroy the lower part.
So hang on. So what are you saying? So there were so it wasn't pancaking. There were explosives all the way down. Is that?
Yes,
is that
that's
what you're saying?
That's what we see in the first. Actually, in the first 3 seconds, we see a controlled demolition like Building 7. After that, it turns into a different phase, a very explosive phase, where the structure is blown out, not down, but out and down, and then leaving intact the spine standing 900 feet in the air for a dozen seconds. So, and then it falls vertically through the smoke, as we saw. So that's what we're looking at, and we see the evidence of explosions in the witnesses, 156 of them, in fact, first responders, declaring in testimony, orally recorded, producing 12,000 pages of testimony read by Professor Graham McQueen. Let's look at a couple of them. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. So we're talking about explosions. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. It felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower's collapsing. Again and again, you're going to hear a very specific order of events here. They're hearing, they're feeling, they're seeing explosions before the towers come down. This also completely pulls the rug out from underneath the directed energy weapons theory. Shook my bones shortly before the first tower came down. I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. None of these witnesses are acknowledged, by the way, by NIST, who was paid $20 million to study these collapses and came up with yet another fire collapse theory. I saw a flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building? Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, flash, flash. And then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all 4 sides. Materials shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this expert witness, this fire chief, need to be? This completely pulls the rug out from underneath the directed energy weapons theory all by itself. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Well, let's look at feature number 3. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Well, the building actually begins to tilt to the left, the South Tower, the first one to come down. It's tilting, in fact, at 20 degrees. And so there's asymmetrical loading on the structure below by its tilt. There's asymmetrical damage from the fires. There's asymmetrical damage from the plane that hit it. How in the world, then, do we get complete symmetrical destruction all the way around, like the firefighter said, all 4 sides of the building? It makes no sense, given what's going on up above. Well, what does make sense? We can find out if we zoom into the leading corner of these explosions. I see in this looped video about a dozen independent explosions, including what we call at the bottom a squib, isolated explosive ejection.
Yeah, you can see them there.
Yep. This is not a directed energy weapon doing this. These are obviously pre-placed explosions in the exterior structure of the building. It's also not a nuclear weapon going off. These are synchronized explosions.
Yes, I've heard that mini nuke theory also.
Uh-huh. Well, does this look like a nuclear weapon?
No, I don't think so.
Below. Maybe about 1,000 of them, real tiny itty bitty ones, but why would you do that when you can just place explosives? And nuclear weapons leave massive radiation and bright light, many, many times brighter than the sun. Let's look at feature number 4. There's more evidence here. Isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry. These are found 40 stories down below the destruction, even as far down as 60 stories. What's producing these? A directed energy weapon way down there? No, we're talking about mistimed explosions in all likelihood. And in this case, probably correctly timed explosions in the South Tower. Before it begins to lean to the right, we see about a dozen isolated explosive ejections destroying the rigidity of the structure, which is why it doesn't maintain its angular momentum and fall off the rigid structure below onto the ground in one piece. It's been dismantled, disintegrated essentially. How fast is it coming down? Well, physicists have also measured this speed of acceleration, not deceleration. It's not slowing down as it meets the cold, hard steel below. It's speeding up. It's 64% or 2/3 of free fall acceleration. That's almost as fast as dropping a bowling ball out of the sky. But that has to meet resistance. There's 287 massive core columns in this building, 52 inches by 22 inches, almost solid steel at the bottom. 47 of them. They're not providing all their strength. 90% of their strength has been removed to achieve 64% of free fall. And we're talking also 240 steel perimeter columns all the way around the building, marching. And there's more steel than glass on the exterior of this building. It could hold 20 times the gravity loads because of this orthogonal Verandil truss that's designed to resist wind loads, makes it very, very strong to resist gravity loads. So no way could this come down at free fall or near free fall. So we look at more evidence, and that's the lateral ejection of those steel exterior perimeter sections. 8 and 4 ton structural steel sections ejected laterally at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, impaling themselves into the skyscrapers all around the structure, the two towers, destroying the Winter Garden 600 feet away, destroying the Deutsche Bank building across the street. It had to be dismantled. These are those sections. Look at that gentleman crawling on them. They are bolted together, one on top of the other, with 4 to 6 bolts, depending on their location. All the plane had to do was to impact with its massive tonnage, including the jet fuel, and push these exterior sections inward, shearing those 4 bolts in the case of this section. So it didn't have to slice the building. Yes, aluminum is softer than steel, but it punctured the exterior by pushing these sections in, shearing off those bolts. And why are they trailing all, they're freely flying, by the way, which this proves. There's not like a banana peeling off the building. Why are they trailing thick white smoke clouds? Look at this one. Back to, forward to, back to. It starts out horizontal. How does gravity work? Down. What's going on here? Out. This is an explosive force pushing this 4-ton structural steel section out. This alone also destroys the directed energy weapons theory. And what's trailing it? Thick white smoke clouds. We found that that is the other byproduct of thermite, aluminum oxide ash. There's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. Where's that energy coming from? High energy explosives. And we're talking about a 1,200-foot diameter around each of the towers, impacting even Building 7 that far away. And by the way, if that's true, Jerm, we have to figure out if 100,000 tons of steel in each of these buildings, I said 90,000 earlier, it's 100,000, is distributed outside the footprint, what's crushing the building? The steel can't crush the building if it's been ejected laterally outside of it from the top down. Can it? No. Maybe it was a concrete. There's a lot of concrete in this building. There's 110 floors of concrete, each of them an acre in size, but we're looking for them. We can't find them. There were 4 and 8-inch thick concrete slabs poured on metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for 110 of these acre-size floors. We don't find in the base 50 of those floors. We don't find 20 of them. We don't find 1 acre-size floor. We don't find a half acre, a quarter acre, a 16th of an acre size floor. In a real gravitational collapse, we find pancakes like this earthquake-damaged building in Mexico. We find pancakes like this earthquake-damaged building in Bangkok. By the way, this was a 33-story building that pancaked. How tall was its pile? Its pile was 10 times the height of a man. We're talking 8 stories tall of pancakes. How many stories of pancakes should we have expected in a 110-floor building, 3 times the size of this Bangkok earthquake? We should have found a 30-story building, a pile, 30-story size pile, but we don't. But this is a 3 or 4, 5-story building pile. Miscellaneous metal, no concrete. No, we're talking about a real problem in comparison here. So where's the concrete? Oh, there it is. Pulverized in midair. This is not steel dust that the DEW people suggest. This is pulverized concrete by high energy explosives or extreme heat. What can pulverize concrete? Well, 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, about half that Celsius, can produce what? White powdered decomposed hydration products. Wow. According to ASTM C856, we're talking about high heat. Now, thermite, we found, is 4,000 and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 times these temperatures. So, this is documented by the Fire Safety Journal as well. 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Concrete specimens subjected to this temperature were completely decomposed. So heat can do it. High energy explosives can do it. But it was done. And this is the proof right here and here. And it was distributed where? Throughout lower Manhattan. 90,000 tons of concrete pulverized to 100-micron particles distributed in a blanket 3 inches thick across lower Manhattan. Wait a minute. That presents another problem. If 90,000 tons of concrete is pulverized and spread over 3 square miles, is it crushing the building? No. It can't crush the building either, right? It's distributed in a 3 square mile area around the building. From the top down, it was pulverized. So what's crushing this building that Zdeněk Bazant spent 2 days creating the key theoretical basis for NIST's column failure theory, submitting to a major university, claiming that the top part destroyed the lower part? Well, there's some errors in it. It took the engineers 10 years to decode it. They found that he fraudulently doubled the mass up above the point of plane impacts. He decreased the column strength below by a factor of 3. It's completely rigged fraudulently in favor of a collapse. And that fraud was exposed by engineers who submitted this to the same paper that Bazant submitted his to. The American Society of Civil Engineers won't publish it. Why? They said, oh, it's out of scope. What? How is it out of scope to publish a paper challenging a previously published paper in that journal, Journal of Engineering Mechanics? It's not out of scope. That's what we do in peer-reviewed science. So there's lawsuits going on about that still. Well, how would they have had access in the building to plant explosives and incendiaries? Well, they might have done it during the fireproofing upgrades that happened in the months and years prior to 9/11. Because we should note, coincidentally, many of those floors were coincident with the floors that the planes hit. So maybe those planes were supposed to hit those floors, which weren't upgraded with fireproofing, but perhaps liquid applied nanothermite in a deceptive intumescent paint fireproofing upgrade. It's a possibility. Needs more research. Kevin Ryan gave us this research. You can find it at digwithin.net. How else might they have gotten in? Well, if you had access to the core columns to the elevators in the building, you'd have access to the core columns that surround those elevator shafts. Well, did we have an elevator modernization? Yeah, we sure did. But you'd have to go through 2 inches of gypsum board to access those columns outside these elevator shafts. If you could descend through the elevator shafts and try to obtain that access, it'd create quite a dusty mess. If any of you have ever done gypsum board work, you find it's quite a mess. Well, listen to what Scott Forbes testifies to. He's the senior database administrator at Fiduciary Trust, one of the World Trade Center tenants.
It was probably the week leading up to 9/11. Every morning I'd come in around 7 a.m. and the dust was incredible. It was filthy. It was like the cleaners weren't cleaning. Right where the windows were, there was a sill which enclosed radiators. I was sick to death of the dust which was appearing on the windowsills. It was dirty grey and very, very noticeable in that week leading up to 9/11.
Very interesting, given the largest elevator modernization in the world, documented in March of 2001, before 9/11, where Ace Elevator had the contract. They got it from Otis Elevator, who had installed and had been maintaining these elevators up to the point of this contract. The Ace Elevator employees, of which they had 85 by some accounts in the building, they're all safe and accounted for. They fled. They didn't help the first responders rescue these victims. Is it possible that explosives could have been planted in the guise of this elevator modernization? We think so. And we have also the destruction of evidence and easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. 400 truckloads a day. Carting this evidence to China on these barges for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper investigation. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene. prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, crucial evidence that can answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But it didn't. And now we have to look back with the evidence that we do have and realize that we have all the key components, characteristics of controlled demolition. Fire doesn't create any one of these, let alone all 10 of them. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, that becomes proof, a body of proof convincing 3,600 architects and engineers sign on publicly to a petition demanding a new investigation. And they do appear in our film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And we do have all of this documented, 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts. In our landmark documentary, came out 2013, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. The 15-minute documentary made for PBS, narrated by actor Ed Asner, just on Building 7. 15 minutes, that's the one to show everybody as a first step. And then the deeper look into the forensic study, the dynamic analysis by the University of Alaska on Building 7 and the engineers that helped. All this is documented, outlined for you in our brochure, which you can hand to every architect and engineer you can find, everybody else that you know. Because the proof of Building 7 and the Twin Towers destruction is a dark one. We've got to get eyes on it after 25 years now. We are putting together the 25th anniversary conference in New York, and we're inviting everybody to come to New York on September 11th and the 10th and the 12th and the 13th. We'll be announcing that in a week. And you're going to need that information and that camaraderie and to gird up your own courage, because you're going to have to draw a line in the sand at some point. Say, thus far and no farther. I am not going to stand by and allow this scam on the world, which caused the invasion of two countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, in which 2 million people have perished. The destruction of our civil liberties in America and around the world through the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, where each of us, any of us, can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be tortured, even assassinated, legally, under these emergency conditions created by this scam, this hoax, this false flag operation known as 9/11. So don't stick your head in the sand after hearing this information. Those of you who share this with others, make sure they don't either. Jerm's audience is different than most. They're educated. They're taught to critically think and do their own research. And I hope all of you will not only do that, but have your friends, family, relatives speak the truth. It's time. It's not too late. Is it, Jerm?
Well, it's almost too late looking at the time, but I have to throw in a question that I have a feeling you're not going to want to answer, and I completely understand. But everybody wants to know who.
Well, who had access to the Twin Towers and Building 7, three of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon? We'll get to the Pentagon in a second. Who had access to these buildings? Al-Qaeda probably didn't. To set explosives on every floor? Unlikely. The security company certainly needs an investigation. Securicom, Stratosec at the time. Who's on the board of those directors? Two Bush family members, Wirt Walker III, Marvin Bush. Cheney has his own tentacles throughout 9/11, who had the capability to cause the air defenses to stand down with air defense drills, confusing the NORAD radar techs so they didn't know what was real world on 9/11 and what wasn't. Who created 43 separate events, most of them hijacking exercise, many of them running those planes into the building, and many of them on 9/11. You know, we begin to get a picture that this is not Al-Qaeda, right? This is elements, rogue elements within our government and industry who had the capability to cover up 9/11. The Attorney General, for instance, Dick Chertoff, sending home the dancing Israelis who were proven Mossad agents after brief captivity in the U.S. after being apprehended by the FBI because of very suspicious behaviors and ties to the Mossad. So, yeah, we can begin to form a picture. It's important that we do. Who had the capability to run this operation and the guise of reacting to it? You mentioned Dick Cheney in the bunker. There's all kinds of major questions that David Ray Griffin has exposed in his book, The New Pearl Harbor and New Pearl Harbor Revisited.
One last time, how can I follow your work?
Well, certainly the website, richardgage911.org, will give you all the evidence that you need to get a real investigation if you have the not only the courage, but the stamina and the time and the reach and connection with other powerful people. Those of you who can and do, we're relying on you to take this evidence and send this podcast with Jerm Warfare and the UK column to every architect and engineer you can find, everybody else that you know, and the media, other media, the lamestream media who will not, who has been censoring the truth, will not speak the truth about these events. They're part of the problem, the deep state, that we must come down if we're to survive our governments, mutual governments in South Africa and the United States and elsewhere.
Richard Gage, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks, Jerm.